Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the EasyPower Tuesday Refresher webinar series. My name is Jim Chastain, and the purpose of this series is to highlight some of the lesser known features of EasyPower in hopes of helping people become more efficient in using the tools and more productive in doing their work. And so for that reason, we are focusing on the database browser and some improvements that we've incorporated and frankly haven't talked about much before this. So hopefully you'll get a couple nuggets of useful information. This will be a little shorter than normal webinars and hopefully more efficient. So at first we want a couple poll questions, very low key, no liability, no obligation, strictly trying to get some feedback, and from my perspective at least. The first is to complete the necessary data collection for a typical study. How many site visits do you usually require? And again, this varies. There's no right or wrong answer. It varies between companies. If you have a design system where you have all the data in front of you, it's less important to make a site visit, but appreciate the information nevertheless. So it looks like we have a quorum. Let's share this with the audience. So there's kind of a sweet spot where multiple visits are usually required, and I'll kind of refer to that reference here as we get further into the discussion. And then secondly, how often do you use EasyPower Database Browser now in the course of completing a typical study? And this one I'm very curious about because I don't frequently get to talk to folks that are not having problems. So again, I appreciate your perspective and your feedback, and this will remain just between us. All right, it looks like we have close to a quorum. Let's give this another 5 seconds. All right, thank you. So folks have weighed in. So frankly, it surprised me a little bit, the responses here, and all the more reason for having this webinar. So good, thank you very much for participating in our little poll questions. A couple, 3 weeks ago, I had a call from a customer that was using the tools, and he said, Jim, what happened to the database browser? I use it all the time. And so that's what prompted this webinar. Frequently, data collection occupies 50% of the man hours required to do a study. And then the other 50% in the modeling and navigating the one line during analysis and troubleshooting. And so to optimize the process, you want to make each of these sections as efficient as possible. And data collection is it's necessary, and it's more difficult in an older system, an older facility. And so it's difficult to make that more efficient other than doing multiple site visits. But my response to the phone call was, well, prior to 11.0, the database browser was basically hidden away in a subfolder. But as of the release of 11.0, it received a promotion. Now, most of the activity or most of the discussion about EasyPower 11.0 was about the unbalanced power flow solver and that's what everybody was talking about at the time. But the database browser was promoted from being a lowly file tab, as it was up until 10.6, to center icon on the focus banner. And it reflects many of the feature enhancements that we're going to talk about here shortly. And this is in keeping with our understanding or our goal to incorporate as many Microsoft Office application features as we can in the tools to make the interface as intuitive and well known to people that use Microsoft applications. Now, in terms of data collection, this is a reprint of page 85 of the Practical Solution Guide for collecting data on breakers. My recommendation has always been to utilize the database browser to make up your own spreadsheet for each type of element, and depending upon what your process is, incorporate that into doing the data collection. Well, a host of new features that came along with moving the icon for database browser include more access to equipment details, enhanced configuration scope, features such as column sorting, filtering, and these are all shared with the database report as well as the database browser. So I'm going to spend a few minutes running through some examples. Now, these are not recommendations. These are just my own what-if example, but I want to show you how to use a database browser to accomplish these. Okay, so here we have a typical one-line diagram. And frankly, the more complex it is, the more difficult the navigation and the more valuable the database browser is. So as I mentioned, database browser now has been positioned in the top center of the focus banner. And as long as I'm in database edit, it's available. And when I invoke the icon, it gives me a display not too dissimilar from the old database browser, but there's a lot of new capability built in. So what we're looking at is the all columns display. So if the data is in the model, the data will be in this matrix. So right now we're looking at the buses subfolder, or buses bookmark, and these are all the elements, all the bus names, and these are all, and there's I think 4 pages here of columns. You can see it goes on. So the point is, and what I used the database browser for prior to this, was to check to make sure there wasn't any missing data. The best way to do that was go to the equipment data report, which is the legacy form that's carried over, and under buses, look for the bracing, because this is what the rating, the interrupt rating or the withstand rating is for that particular bus. Now there's a common habit of disregarding that, either because it's not available or it's too difficult to find, or this is the panel itself or the bus itself is usually not the limiting element. The limiting element is usually the smallest breaker inside the panel. So it wasn't that much of a concern worrying about. But if I look at the breakers, again, what I want to look for is the interrupt rating, because and if this is blank, that's a real problem, because this number comes from the data sheet given the part number that's been entered. If it connects to the device library, then this number or this column will be filled in by the tool. And so it used to be, well, I'm looking for a 0 or a number that's wrong. Now, and so rather than scan through the whole chart, I can just sort it by clicking on the top label, And this with the arrow pointing up, I'm sorting in an increasing value. And the first thing that comes up is I've got two breakers that for some reason don't have a reading there. I can sort in a descending mode. I can see I have 200,000 amp ratings on some of the high voltage 600 volt breakers, high capacity. Or I can look at specific values. If I look at the little filter icon, I can say, well, show me just the ones that are empty. And sure enough, it shows me the two that I have questions about. I can say, show me, let's clear the filters. Show me something that's less than, let's say 55 kiloamps. If I apply this filter, it'll show everything up to 50 kiloamps. And I can reverse the order there. So this ends up being very useful. I can combine the filters and say, well, show me anything that's, let's say, constant current of less than 300 amps. It comes from a breaker manufacturer such as Allen Bradley. So applying those two filters, I have the way to condense down the list now that I have inquiries about, and be able to print out a report that looks just like this. The report database is located here, and by clicking on it, it takes that same information now to a report. And I looked at my breakers, and there's a low voltage breaker report that I just requested with the browser. Extremely useful, extremely helpful, and very versatile. So if we go back to the database browser, another useful printout or report is a cable scheduling report, a cable schedule. So if we look at cables, we can orient this by what we want to see or give to the electricians that are going to do the work, and either include or exclude whatever columns that are required. So that's relatively easy to construct. I'm going to construct a schedule here, or a specific form as I get to the end of this. Now let's say I wanted to look for, say I got an alert on tech cables for some reason, and I wanted to, so any tech cable over 100 feet needed to have the insulation checked. So I'm going to sort this for Tech 90. And then set my length to greater than 90 feet. Make sense? So now I have a list of cables that I need to send out to the team and verify that we don't have a problem with insulation. So that's a combination of filtering. I can clear the filters and start over. Or I can incorporate a pre-built combination of filters that I have. If I want to go back and look at my buses, let's look at Look at my data report and look at the buses. Like the old database, it tells us we've used 139 buses or nodes, which gives us an idea of how much of our EasyPower license we've consumed or occupied. But let's say we wanted to look at buses, because I know somewhere in the plant I have buses that were built by a company called Vertal, and let's say they have an issue. So I'm going to use find in my I don't have manufacturer. Let's go back there. So I put in the term I want to find, name of the company, and it locates it under the manufacturers tab or column. And if I sort on that column, it'll give me it'll show the occurrence of that particular manufacturer. It only happens one time. And I could have done the same thing if I just say, well, go in and find Vertel or Riddle. And we could do that for any combination of words, not just for manufacturers, but for part numbers, installation, ratings, etc. So that's what find is for. Now, once I find or utilize the database browser to locate a certain element, let's say I want to look at this. I'm looking at buses. And this bus was built by Federal Pioneer. If I want to make an adjustment or look at that particular element in the database, I can right-click and modify the item, the dialog box, without having to search through the one-line diagram. And there may be something that we need to modify or verify based upon the way this is set up. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is that one source of errors when you're working on an older one line is auto calculate may not be set. And so when you find a missing element that doesn't have a rating, it's worthwhile to go in and check the dialog box rather than just throw your hands up. We can also locate that element on the one-line diagram. And so the bus that's highlighted in green is that bus that I have the dialog box open for. Usually saves a lot of time. And then go back to now. A case to be made is it's only showing that one bus, and the reason for that is I have it selected on the one-line diagram. So if I come back here, that makes me aware that if I wanted to just find or search this particular set of elements, I can do that with the database browser as well. And so it limits the number of choices or the number of items in the list that we're going to have to be dealing with. So these are the buses that I selected when we're looking at the bus display. Again, if I go back to the one-line diagram and don't select anything, I bring up all the elements. My database browser now has all data. So I want to build a report regarding my fuses, and I want to look at specifically the interrupt ratings that are coming up on the fuses. So we're going to look at, I don't have a I want to talk about QR codes first. One of the things that I'm an advocate for is putting a QR code on a label so that more information can be delivered to um, the field personnel who have the ability to scan a QR code, and that can be reflected in the label that's built by EasyPower. And so in that case, I've used the device code as a field that's available for doing unique values or unique assignments. And it's available now in this all columns report. And so I'm going to utilize it in my QR code configuration. And by doing that, I can see now I can sort on device code and see that I have half a dozen assigned. And I can go in now and update that information. If I look at to show you what I'm talking about, if I look at the dialog box for this particular bus, I have a unique value in the device code, and that's what's cues the QR text or the QR insignia in my label. So the point being, I can sort on any column now that's in the database for any element, in this case buses, and be able to quickly find any specific item or parameter that I want to, that I need to. Okay, so let's go back to building a fuse configuration. So let's start fresh. So I want to build a report for fuses, and I want to know specifically the interrupt rating. So let's start a new configuration. Let's call it fuses. We're going to uncheck all these boxes over here from the columns and just pick out fuses. Now we can pick out which bus it's on. I got to check the fuse. Okay, which bus it's on, the voltage, the normal state, number of phases, options, fuse manufacturer. I can look at the standard that it's being tested to. Might as well get the fuse type, base kV, and the interrupt rating. That's what I'm mostly interested in. And the test standard is being used for that test. So now that I do this, I'm going to say this is my fuse configuration. And then select it. And now when I come over here to fuses, I can see that in fact I do have some missing data in my interrupt column, and it quickly shows that this is because these are IEC rated elements. And if I go in and look at that dialog box, or looked at the element on the one line in the dialog box, I can see on my short circuit that when I click calculate, it shows a braking capacity but it's still an IEC rating. So that's not going to give me the interrupt rating that's expected in an ANSI analysis. So with that in mind, as long as this deals with the location I've placed this in the circuit, I feel comfortable it's going to work properly. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I've saved that. When I go back to my database browser, it's applying that sort on all of the elements in the system. Okay, I've got a question here from Raymond. Please discuss modeling database for manual transfer switches, bus tiebreakers, double throw switches, and with or without neutral position. Seems like I have one of those. Any questions on the database browser? This is about as much fun as it gets because you can sort and indicate if you've got missing data, if you've got missing decimal points, or you have wrong data. It's very useful. The more you understand about the tool, the more efficient you'll be in the analysis. Okay, so I'm going to try to address, can we view calculated values in the database value? A short circuit. It's a good question. You can calculate resistance. You'll see the resistance value that's been calculated. Let me go back to all columns. Seems like I've asked that question, or I've been asked that question. Let's look. Since I haven't done short circuit analysis, let's go back and see what happens. Well, I've set this to do an IEC calculation. Hold on. All right, so the question is, do these short circuit results show up in the database browser? My guess is no, because there are so many values based upon whatever code, whatever type of fault I'm applying. Let's look at it. So that's, yeah, that'd be a function in equipment duty. So if I was looking at the reliability, data status, I think this is just in the model of the database one line and all the settings for the digital file. So those would be the result of equipment duty or a short circuit. Sorry about that. Please discuss modeling for database manual transfer switches. So I need to have an example. Let's see if we can put one here. So the transfer switches, there's an ATS built into the circuit, built into the system, and it's basically a manual transfer system as it is. So if I hook it up, and then put a load on the downstream side. It's either one or the other. So to answer your question, I'd model it as a typical configuration, and then I'd change the position of the switch and save that as a different scenario. So double throw, yeah, without a neutral. So bus ties, I think there may be one in here. Here's a bus tie, a tiebreaker. So this is modeled just as a connection, and a scenario would be with this, the base case might be with this open, and there might be a scenario where this is closed, combined with other sources not being available. So Raymond, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but this is a typical breaker. It's handled like every other breaker, except it's mounted differently, but it operates just the same. Likewise from an ATS. An ATS is either just a physical switch, or it's a breaker that can be incorporating protective elements. And so it'd be a switch, or it could be a breaker. I'm getting close to what you needed to see. Raymond, yeah, if you have more questions about that, let's handle it offline. But I appreciate the question. So again, to save time, first and foremost, before you start collecting data anywhere, you should make sure you're comfortable with the mechanics of the tools and be able to develop a model, a very simplified model that gives you the results you're expecting with the minimum data you need to put in there. And based upon that, you should put together a spreadsheet that can be used for data collection to make sure you're not missing any particular feature in the tools. And then above all, take a digital image. Oh, that's the other thing I didn't show. Take a digital image of the label on the breaker or panel or transformer and keep it intact with the project. Because for this breaker, there's always a collected data pane. And within this pane, you can save an image. And if you've taken a legible or easy to read picture of the label, it'll save you an extra trip to the field if you haven't got all the data off of that element. In fact, that's the way some data collection is done by some people. They just go through and take pictures of each element with annotations about main on that particular bus and then the feeders. And they have a system that they can tell by their notes and the pictures that were taken, that the nameplates on each of the elements, how to draw the one-line diagram once they get back to the office. Okay, so that's all I had for today. Hopefully you got nuggets that are worthwhile paying attention for. Be sure to check out the tutorials and the webinars and the newsletter. We have live regional training scheduled for at least the first half of this year. And any questions, you're welcome to contact me or tech support. Thank you very much for attending. So Jason's asking just a question that came in late. Is there any chance we can use the database browser to act somewhat like a toolbar along the side of our screen, similar to AutoCAD, and then I can select an entity in the model? So, Jason, it's almost that way. If I go back to my database browser, I've got on my all columns selection, I can look at a bus or any element in that display and then access it by right-clicking and go to that item on the one-line diagram. So the only downside is going back. And so I have to go back through the database to get back to that element. So for instance, if I pick out, let's say, a low voltage, well, yeah, so the downside is I need to unselect the element that I picked up. I go to the database browser, I can pick out a single element, let's say a breaker. And then once I've selected the breaker, I can go to it on the one line and then modify it or deal with whatever I need to do. Yeah, so I can populate it here, or see, that's why in my book, once you understand what you're doing, once you understand what you're accessing, I've got this breaker. I can right click on it and populate the element in this dialog box. So let's try this again. So it's a workflow situation. Pick out what works for you, and it may be able to save you a bunch of time. Now, for those of you that are used to AutoCAD, there may be an advantage of using the Revit integrator. So that's the subject for another time. But the point I want to make is from my database browser, all columns, I can right click on a specific element, let's say this bus, modify the item directly, change it to whatever needs to be changed, and then go back to my listing on the database browser. So that's what I would suggest. Now, with that in mind, and you've got your finger on the pulse here, the next step we're anticipating, not necessarily short term, but being able to do quality block data updates based upon accessing through the database browser. So stay tuned for that. All right, thank you very much. Have a good week. We'll talk to you in the future.